Will you be my apple for one day? The question cut to the smoke and silence of the Golden Lotus like a knife through silk. Roland Johnson, an 8-year-old boy with a purple bruise blooming beneath his left eye and a wrinkled school uniform 2 sizes too small, stood at the entrance of the private lounge clutching a hand-drawn career day invitation. Above him, golden dragons coiled across black lacquered walls, their eyes seeming to follow his every trembling breath. 15 members of the Black Dragon Syndicate froze mid-motion, cards suspended over felt tables, whiskey glasses halfway to lips, cigarettes burning forgotten between tattooed fingers. Every eye in the room locked onto the small figure silhouetted against the red corridor lights. Gamgee, the Syndicate's underboss, was the first to break the silence. He sat at the head table, his slick back hair catching the amber glow of the pendant lamps, neck tattoos visible above his unbuttoned collar. "Kid." His voice was a low rumble, equal parts curiosity and warning. "How did you get past Jinho?" Before we continue, take a second to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. I love knowing where these stories travel. Roland's fingers tightened around a crumpled invitation, the paper softening from his sweaty palms. He'd practiced this moment 17 times in the mirror of the gas station bathroom 3 blocks away, but now every word he'd memorized scattered like ashes in wind. "I waited until he went to the bathroom," Roland whispered, then louder, forcing the words past a knot in his throat. "Please, I need someone to pretend to be my dad, just for one day." A laugh erupted from somewhere in the back, sharp and disbelieving. One of the younger members started to rise from his chair, but Gamgee raised a single finger. The room fell silent again, as if he'd pressed a mute button on reality itself. "Jinho went to the bathroom," Gamgee repeated, a ghost of amusement flickering across his features. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. "So you saw an opportunity, and you took it. That's bold, kid. Stupid, but bold." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit." Roland hesitated. Everything in his body screamed at him to run. The way Miller had taught him to recognize danger, the way his mom's nervous eyes tracked movements before violence erupted. But he'd come this far. 3 bus transfers, 2 hours of walking, 1 lie told to his mother about studying at the library. He moved toward the table on legs that felt borrowed, climbing onto a chair that sat too high for his small frame. Up close, Gamgee was more terrifying than from the doorway. The neck tattoo wasn't just decoration. It was a dragon's tail that disappeared beneath his collar, suggesting something massive and hidden beneath his expensive shirt. His cologne smelled like cedar and something darker, something that reminded Roland of the inside of churches. "What's your name?" Gamgee asked. "Roland Johnson." "Korean?" "My mom was. I mean, she still is, but..." Roland stumbled over his words. "She doesn't talk about Korea anymore. Not since Miller." Something changed in Gamgee's expression, a subtle hardening around the eyes. He pulled a silver cigarette case from his jacket, extracted one, then paused. His gaze flicked to Roland, and he put it back unlit. "Miller," Gamgee said slowly, tasting the name. "Your father?" "Stepdad." The word came out like a curse. "He says I'm the reason my real dad left. Says my mom would be better off if I'd never been born." Roland's voice cracked. "At school, there's this boy, Bradley. His dad is rich. Important. Bradley calls me nobody. Because my dad isn't coming career day. Says I don't have a dad because even my own father knew I was worthless." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Roland watched as several of the men exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something harder, colder. "So you came here," Gamgee said, "to the Golden Lotus, to ask the Black Dragon Syndicate to provide you with a father." He tilted his head. "Do you know what we are, Roland?" "Yes." Roland met his eyes. "You're gangsters, criminals, bad guys." He swallowed hard. "But Bradley's dad is bad too. He just wears nicer suits and nobody calls him that." A surprised bark of laughter came from one of the men, a stocky figure with a scar bisecting his eyebrow. "The kid's got a point, boss." Gamgee studied Roland for a long moment, his fingers drumming against a lacquered table. How did you even know where to find us? I heard Miller on the phone. He was scared, really scared. He kept saying the Golden Lotus, and I'll have your money, and please don't hurt my family. Roland's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I figured if Miller's afraid of you, maybe Bradley would be too. The drumming stopped. Gamgee's entire body went still, and Roland recognized that particular kind of stillness, the kind that came before explosions. But when Gamgee spoke, his voice was eerily calm. Miller owes us money. It wasn't a question, but Roland nodded anyway. How much does he owe? I don't know. He won't say. But he took my mom's wedding ring last week. Her grandmother's necklace the week before that. Roland's hands balled into fists on his lap. He said it was my fault. Said if I wasn't around, eating food and taking up space, he'd have enough money. Gamgee glanced at someone behind Roland. Young Sue, check the books. Miller Johnson. Footsteps retreated toward what Roland assumed was an office. The silence stretched taut as wire. Roland counted his own heartbeats, 37 of them, before the footsteps returned. Miller Anderson. A voice corrected from behind. Uses his girlfriend's son's last name sometimes to dodge calls. He's into us for $43,000. 3 months overdue. Collection scheduled for next week. Roland felt the blood drain from his face. $43,000. That was more money than he'd ever imagined Miller having, being. No wonder his mom looked so tired. No wonder Miller's hands had gotten heavier. Does your mother know you're here? Gamgee asked quietly. No. Roland's voice was barely audible. She thinks I'm studying. Does Miller know about career day? He laughed when I showed him the invitation. Said no one important would waste time on me. Roland forced himself to look up, to meet Gamgee's dark eyes. I know I'm nobody. I know I'm not worth it. But just for one day, just for a few hours, I wanted Bradley and everyone else to think maybe I was worth something, even if it was pretend. The words hung in the smoke-hazed air, naked and desperate. Roland braced himself for the laughter, the rejection, the violence. He'd miscalculated. He'd walked into a dragon's den with nothing but hope and a crumpled invitation, and now he'd be lucky to walk out at all. Instead, Gamgee stood. He was taller than Roland had realized, his presence seeming to fill the entire room. He walked around the table and crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with Roland. Up close, his face was younger than it had seemed from across the room, maybe mid-30s, but his eyes were ancient. Listen to me very carefully, Gamgee said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent room. You are not nobody. You are not worthless. Any man who tells a child those things is not a man at all. He placed one hand on Roland's shoulder, and Roland flinched despite himself. Gamgee didn't pull away. You walked through that door alone. You asked for help. That takes more courage than most of the people in this room have ever shown. He stood, turned to face his crew. Gentlemen, we have a career day to attend. The pronouncement should have been met with protest, with questions, with the practical concerns of men who lived in shadows. Instead, the silence deepened, became something heavier. Roland watched as 15 pairs of eyes fixed on their underboss, waiting for the punchline that never came. You're serious, the scarred man said finally. It wasn't a question. Do I look like I'm joking, Taemin? Gamgee's tone carried the weight of finality, but Taemin wasn't backing down. He stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Boss, with respect, we have operations scheduled. The shipment from Busan arrives Thursday. We have collections, meetings, the situation with the Bratva, which can all wait one day. Gamgee turned back to Roland, and for the first time since entering the Golden Lotus, Roland saw something other than intimidation in an adult's face. He saw focus, the kind his teachers reserve for difficult math problems. When is career day? Friday, Roland whispered. This Friday, 9 in the morning. Friday, Gamgee repeated. He looked at Taemin. The Busan shipment doesn't arrive until Friday night. The Bratva meeting is Saturday. Collections can be postponed 48 hours. His voice dropped an octave. Or are you telling me the Black Dragon Syndicate can't spare a few hours for a child? Taemin's jaw worked, but he sat back down. No, boss. We can spare the time. Good. Gamgee moved back to his seat, but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against the table, studying Roland with an intensity that made the boy want to squirm. Look at me. Roland obeyed, tilting his face up toward the pendant lights. The movement pulled at something tender, and he couldn't quite stop the wince. The eye, Gamgee said quietly. How long ago? Yesterday. Roland's hand moved instinctively toward his face, then stopped. Miller had taught him that touching injuries only drew more attention. It's not that bad. I've had worse. The temperature in the room plummeted. Roland felt in the way breathing suddenly seemed difficult, in the way the ambient noise of the street outside faded to nothing. He looked around, confused by the transformation. The men who'd been casually dangerous a moment ago now radiated something else entirely, a cold, focused rage that made a survival instinct scream. You've had worse, Gamgee repeated, each word carefully spaced, meaning this isn't the first time Miller has put his hands on you. It wasn't phrased as a question, but Roland found himself nodding anyway. The truth felt too big to hold inside anymore, spilling out in words he'd never said aloud to anyone. He says he's teaching me respect. That my real dad left because I didn't know how to behave. That someone has to discipline me since my mom is too soft. Your mother? Gamgee's voice had gone very soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. Does he hit her too? Roland's silence was answer enough. Behind Gamgee, Young Soo, the man who checked the books, spoke up. Boss, I'm pulling Miller's file now. If he's laying hands on the kid, on the girlfriend. He paused, his fingers flying across a laptop that looked absurdly modern against the traditional decor. Christ, he's got a history. 2 domestic violence charges, both dropped. 1 restraining order from an ex, expired. He's been dodging our collectors for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Gamgee said, his tone meditative. So he's been avoiding paying us while continuing to spend money. On what, I wonder? According to his credit card statements, which he stupidly used for payment plans, he just bought a motorcycle. Harley Davidson. $15,000. Young Soo looked up from his screen, disgusted. He owes us $43,000, and he bought a motorcycle. The scarred man, Taemin, let out a low whistle. That's disrespectful. That's suicidal. Another voice added from the back. Roland felt like he was watching a play he didn't understand, where the actors all knew their lines, but he'd missed the first 2 acts. I don't understand. Why does it matter that he bought a motorcycle? Gamgee crouched down again, bringing himself back to Roland's eye level. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge, becoming almost gentle. In our world, Roland, there are rules. You borrow money, you pay it back. You give your word, you keep it. And you never, ever take food from your own family to feed your pride. He gestured at the bruise around Roland's eye. Miller is doing all 3. He borrowed money he hasn't returned. He gave us his word and broke it. And he's taking from you and your mother your food, your safety, your grandmother's necklace, so he could buy toys for himself. But what does that have to do with career day? Roland asked, confused by the sudden shift in energy. By the way, these dangerous men seem more angry about Miller's debt than about a stranger's child showing up uninvited. Everything. Gamgee said simply. He stood, addressing his crew. Here's how this works. Friday, we all attend career day. We show this boy in his school that he has a family. A real family. People who show up when it matters. His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to object. And after career day, we pay a visit to Miller. Not for business. Not for the debt, though we'll collect that too. We visit him because no man who raises his hand to a child gets to walk away from that. What about the mother? Young Soo asked. If we move on Miller directly, does she know? Is she safe? That's what we find out. Gamgee pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I know a social worker. Used to be married to one of the wolves before they relocated to Seattle. Discreet. Good at extracting people from bad situations. He looked at Roland. Your mother's name? Sarah. Sarah Kim. The name felt strange on his tongue, like something from another life. She'd been Sarah Kim before Miller, before the bruises, before the fear. But she won't leave. She's tried before. He always finds us. He finds you, Gamgee corrected, because you don't have resources, protection, options. He typed something into his phone. That changes now. As of this moment, you're under protection of the Black Dragon Syndicate, which means Miller just made the worst mistake of his miserable life. Roland wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that 15 gangsters in an underground lounge could somehow fix everything that was broken in his life. But hope was dangerous. Hope was what got you hurt when reality came crashing back. Why? The question escaped before Roland could stop it. Why do you care? You don't know me. I'm just some kid who walked in and interrupted your night. Gamgee was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something Roland hadn't expected, memory, old and painful. Because 20 years ago I was you, he said simply, and no one came. The confession hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Roland stared at Gamgee, trying to reconcile the powerful man before with the image of a frightened child. It seemed impossible. Men like Gamgee weren't born afraid. They were carved from stone, immune to the weaknesses that plagued ordinary people. But something in his eyes told a different story. Something old and unhealed. Gamgee cleared his throat, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Young Sue, send Roland's address to my phone. Arrange for a car to take him home. Not one of ours. Something civilian. A taxi. He looked at Roland. You're going to go home now. Tomorrow after school, you come back here. We'll need details about the school, the layout, the schedule, and you'll need to give us names. Names! Roland's voice cracked. The bullies. The teachers who look away. Anyone who's made you feel like you don't matter. Gamgee's expression was granite. By Friday, they'll all understand exactly how much you matter. Roland nodded, not trusting his voice. A taxi was summoned with a phone call. Young Sue pressed two $20 bills into Roland's hand. For emergencies, kid. And then he was ushered out through a different door than he'd entered, emerging onto a side street where the evening air tasted like freedom and terror in equal measure. The taxi ride home passed in a blur. Roland's mind couldn't process what had just happened. Couldn't quite believe that 15 dangerous men had agreed to attend his career day, that they cared about his bruises, that anyone, had finally said he mattered. But as the taxi pulled away and Roland climbed the stairs to his apartment, reality settled back over his shoulders like a familiar weight. Miller's truck was parked in its usual spot. The lights were on. Inside, his mother would be cooking dinner with 2 quick movements, the kind that said she was nervous, that Miller was in one of his moods. Roland touched the folded bills in his pocket. His secret, his evidence that tonight had been real, and walked inside. Back at the Golden Lotus, the private lounge had transformed into something resembling a war room. The moment Roland left, Gamgee had locked the door and turned to face his crew with an expression that made even Taemin sit up straighter. Before we go any further, Gamgee said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, I need you all to understand what we're about to do. This isn't business. This isn't about the $43,000 Miller owes us, though we'll collect that too. This isn't even about sending a message to other debtors, though the message will be received. He moved to the center of the room, and in the amber light of the pendant lamps, his shadow seemed to stretch and multiply. This is about a child who walked through our door because he had nowhere else to go. A child who's been beaten, belittled, and broken by a man who should protect him. A child who thinks he's worthless because every adult in his life has either hurt him or failed to stop the hurt. Boss, one of the younger members spoke up. Jihoon, barely 22, newer to the organization. No disrespect, but we're not exactly heroes. We've all done things. I know exactly what we are. Gamgee cut him off, but his tone wasn't harsh. We're criminals, gangsters, men who've made choices that put us outside the law and outside society's protection. But that doesn't mean we're without honor. That doesn't mean we're like Miller. He let the name settle, poisonous and damning. Miller is a coward. He beats a child and a woman because they can't fight back. He steals from his own family to feed his ego. He borrows money and doesn't pay it back, then hides behind the people he's supposed to protect. Gamgee's voice dropped lower, became something lethal. Men like Miller are why men like us exist. Because the law doesn't protect everyone. Because sometimes the system fails. Because sometimes the only justice available is the kind we deliver ourselves. Tae-min stood, his scarred face thoughtful. So we're going to war. We're going to war, Gamgee confirmed. But not the kind you're thinking. Friday, we walk into Roosevelt Elementary School in our best suits, carrying no weapons, breaking no laws. We sit in those tiny chairs and we listen to 8-year-olds talk about what their parents do for a living. We smile and we're polite, and we make absolutely certain that every person in that building understands that Roland Johnson is not alone, that he has a family, that he matters. And then, Young-soo asked, and then we introduce ourselves to Miller, properly. The smile that crossed Gamgee's face was not kind. We explain his situation. We make our expectations very, very clear. And we make sure he understands that his debt isn't just financial anymore. He owes that boy an apology of childhood and about 8 years of safety he stole. The crew exchanged glances, a silent conversation happening in the language of men who'd worked together for years. Finally, Tae-min nodded. I'm in, but boss, we do this right. No half measures. If we're claiming this kid, we claim him all the way. That means protection, resources, making sure he and his mother are set up. Not just Friday. Not just until Miller's gone. Long term. Agreed, Gamgee said, which brings me to the oath. The room went silent. The oath was not something invoked lightly. It was older than the Black Dragon Syndicate itself. A tradition carried from the motherland, from the dark days when honor was the only currency that mattered. Gamgee moved to the wall, where the golden dragons coiled across black lacquer. Beneath them, in a glass case, sat a ceremonial knife, a family heirloom never used, kept for moments when the organization needed to remember what they were beyond business and profit. He opened the case and withdrew the knife. The blade caught the light, ancient and purposeful. We take an oath tonight, Gamgee said, turning to face his crew. Blood for blood, protection for protection. Roland Johnson walked through our door asking for a father for one day. We're going to give him a family for life. He drew the blade across his palm, not deep, but enough to draw blood. Everyone in. This isn't optional. If you're not willing to stand between that boy and danger, if you're not willing to claim him as ours, leave now. No one moved. One by one, they came forward. Tae-min first, then Young-soo, then Ji-hoon and the others whose names Roland didn't yet know. 15 men cut their palms and pressed them together in the old way. Blood mixing with blood, the oath sealing without words. When it was done, Gamgee wrapped his hand in a clean handkerchief. Friday we go to war. But tonight we plan. I want everything on Miller, where he goes, who he knows, what leverage we have. I want the mother's situation assessed. I want to know about the school, the bullies, the staff. He looked at his crew, these men who just sworn themselves to a child they'd never met. And I want suits. Good ones. Because we're going to show Roosevelt Elementary exactly what family looks like. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel too sharp, too real. Roland had barely slept. He'd worn his best clothes, a button-up shirt his mother had ironed 3 times, pants that were only slightly too short, shoes that pinched but looked presentable. She'd noticed his nervousness, attributed it to normal career day jitters, kissed his forehead, and sent him off with a lunch she couldn't afford to pack. He hadn't told her about the Golden Lotus, hadn't mentioned Gamgee or the Blood Oath or any of it. Some part of him still didn't believe it was real, that 15 gangsters would actually show up to an elementary school for nobody like him. By 8:45 a.m., the parking lot of Roosevelt Elementary was filling with sensible sedans and modest SUVs. Parents in business casual clothing filtered through the main entrance, most looking vaguely uncomfortable, already checking their watches. Bradley Chen's father had arrived in a silver Mercedes. His suit probably worth more than Roland's mother made in 6 months. Bradley stood beside him like a prince surveying his kingdom, smirking when he caught sight of Roland hovering near the flagpole. "Where's your dad, nobody?" Bradley called out, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Oh, wait, you don't have one. I forgot." Several kids laughed. Mrs. Patterson, the principal, was too busy greeting parents to notice. Roland felt his face burning, his fists clenching uselessly at his sides. He'd been stupid to hope, stupid to believe that anything would change. Then he heard it. The sound started as a low rumble, growing steadily louder, the synchronized growl of multiple engines approaching in formation. Heads turned toward the street. Conversation faltered. Even Bradley stopped mid-taunt. 10 black SUVs turned onto the street leading to Roosevelt Elementary, moving in perfect synchronization. They weren't speeding, weren't breaking any laws, but there was something deliberate and absolute in their approach. The kind of arrival that said the world had shifted and everyone needed to pay attention. The vehicles pulled into the parking lot with military precision, forming a line that seemed to stretch impossibly long. Every door was identical matte black. Every window was tinted just dark enough to be legal. Chrome gleamed in the morning sun. The engines cut simultaneously. Silence fell over the parking lot like a physical weight. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened, and Gamgee stepped out. He wore a charcoal suit that looked hand-tailored, the kind of garment that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. His shirt was crisp white, his tie a subtle silver gray. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. The neck tattoo was just barely visible above his collar, a reminder of what lay beneath the civilized exterior. Behind him, the other doors opened in sequence. 15 men emerged, each in equally impeccable suits, each moving with the same controlled grace. Taemin, Young-soo, Ji-hoon, and a dozen others whose names Roland had learned over the past 3 days. They looked like corporate executives, diplomats, men of serious business and serious money. But there was something else in the way they moved, something in their eyes that said they were dangerous in ways Bradley's father with his Mercedes and his hedge fund could never imagine. Gamgee's gaze swept the parking lot until it found Roland. He smiled, genuinely smiled, and walked toward him. The others followed, their formation casual but unmistakably coordinated. "Roland," Gamgee said, his voice warm. "Ready for career day?" Roland couldn't speak, could barely breathe. He managed a nod. "Good." Gamgee looked around, taking in the stunned faces, the open mouths, the way parents were pulling their children slightly closer. His smile widened. "Should we head inside?" Mrs. Patterson materialized from the crowd, her professional smile frozen in place but her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Hello, I'm Principal Patterson. And you are?" "Gamgee Park," he said smoothly, extending his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, his manner perfectly polite. "I'm here for career day. Roland invited me." "Roland's?" Mrs. Patterson's gaze flickered to Roland, confused. "His father, Uncle," Gamgee said easily. "The whole family want to come support him. Roland's very important to us." "The whole?" Mrs. Patterson looked at the 15 men now standing in a loose semicircle around Roland, all of them smiling pleasant, completely legal smiles. "I see. That's wonderful. Family involvement is so important." Bradley Chun had gone pale. His father, Marcus Chun, had the look of a man rapidly recalculating odds. Roland watched his recognition flicker across Marcus's face, not of Gamgee specifically, but the type of men these were. The kind you didn't antagonize. The kind who operated in circles where money alone didn't protect you. "Bradley," Marcus said quietly, his hand gripping his son's shoulder. "Why don't we go inside?" But Bradley, for once in his privileged life, had lost the ability to move. He stood frozen, staring at the wall of suits, at Roland standing in the center of it all with Gamgee's hand resting protectively on his shoulder. "You were saying something earlier?" Gamgee's voice was pleasant, conversational. He looked at Bradley with the kind of attention that made grown men nervous. "About Roland being a nobody?" I didn't," Bradley stammered. "I thought I heard something." Gamgee continued, his smile never wavering. "But I must have misunderstood, because obviously no one would be foolish enough to insult a member of our family." He tilted his head slightly. Right, right, Bradley whispered. Sorry, I'm sorry. Not to me, Gamgee said softly. To Roland. Bradley turned to Roland, his face red, his eyes showing the first real fear Roland had ever seen in them. I'm sorry, Roland. I'm sorry. Roland felt something warm unfurling in his chest, something that felt like vindication and safety and belonging all mixed together. He looked up at Gamgee, then at the others, Taemin with his scarred smile, young Sue with his gentle nod. All of them here, all of them real. It's okay, Roland heard himself say, and meant it. Gamgee squeezed his shoulder. Shall we go meet your teachers? He raised his voice slightly. Gentlemen, let's show Roosevelt Elementary what career day is really about. 15 men in perfect suits moved as one, surrounding Roland like an honor guard, walking him toward the school entrance. Behind them, parents whispered and stared. Ahead, teachers and students parted like water. And for the first time in his 8 years of life, Roland Johnson walked into his school knowing, absolutely knowing, that he was not nobody. He was family. The Roosevelt Elementary Auditorium had never felt smaller. 203rd and 4th graders sat cross-legged on the floor, their parents arranged in folding chairs behind them. And at the back, impossible to ignore, 15 men in dark suits stood like silent sentinels. They hadn't sat. Mrs. Patterson had offered chairs, but Gamgee had politely declined, explaining that his associates preferred to stand. It was a small gesture that somehow made them seem even more formidable. Roland sat in the front row with his class, hyper-aware of every whisper, every glance. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, kept looking back at Gamgee with an expression caught between fascination and concern. Bradley Chin sat 3 rows back, uncharacteristically silent. Mrs. Patterson took the microphone with her practiced career day smile, though Roland noticed her hands trembled slightly. Good morning, students and families. We're so excited to have so many parents and guardians joining us today to share about their careers. She glanced at her notes. We'll start with Mr. Chun, who works in financial investment. Marcus Chen's presentation was smooth and professional, full of charts about portfolio management and fiscal responsibility. The kids looked bored. Bradley kept trying to catch his father's eye for validation, but Marcus seemed distracted, his gaze drifting repeatedly toward the back of the room. 3 more parents followed, a nurse, an accountant, a software engineer, all competent, all forgettable. The children fidgeted. Some whispered. The energy in the room was exactly what Roland had expected from career day. Polite, educational, and mind-numbingly dull. Then Mrs. Patterson called his name. And now we'll hear from Mr. Park, who is here with Roland Johnson. Roland's heart hammered as Gamgee moved forward. He walked with unhurried confidence, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent auditorium. The other 14 men shifted slightly, their positions adjusting in a way that seemed unconscious, but created the impression of a protective perimeter. Gamgee took the microphone, and for a long moment, he simply looked at the children seated before him. His expression was thoughtful, considering, as if he were weighing exactly what to say. My name is Gamgee Park, he began, his voice clear and steady. And I want to start by thanking Mrs. Patterson and the staff of Roosevelt Elementary for having us here today. He nodded to the principal, who managed a tight smile in return. I also want to thank Roland for inviting me. It takes courage to ask for help, and Roland has more courage than most adults I know. Roland felt his face grow hot as 200 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Now, Gamgee continued, you're probably wondering what I do for a living. That's the point of career day, isn't it? To learn about different jobs, different paths in life. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I run a family business. We have interests in import-export, real estate, restaurant management, and various other enterprises. It's complicated work that requires loyalty, discipline, and a very specific code of conduct. Ms. Rodriguez raised her hand tentatively. What kind of code? I'm glad you asked. Gamgee's expression grew serious. In my organization, we have rules that everyone follows, no matter how powerful or how new to the business. The most important rule is this. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. A small hand shot up from the second row, a girl named Maya that Roland recognized from his class. Like superheroes? Gamgee smiled genuinely. Something like that. But here's the difference. Superheroes in movies usually work alone. They're special, different from everyone else, and that makes them lonely. In the real world, protection doesn't come from being special. It comes from brotherhood, from having people who will stand beside you when things get difficult. What's brotherhood mean? Another child asked. Brotherhood means family, but not just a family you're born into. It's a family you choose, and that chooses you. Gamgee's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Bradley before moving on. It means that when someone in your family is hurt, you feel that hurt. When someone in your family is threatened, you stand between them and danger, not because you'll get something in return, but because that's what honor demands. The auditorium had gone completely quiet. Even the youngest children seemed transfixed, sensing that something important was being said, even if they couldn't fully articulate what. But here's what's crucial, Gamgee said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate despite the microphone. A real brotherhood, a real family, doesn't use its strength to hurt the weak. It uses its strength to protect them. The moment you use your power to make someone else feel small, to make them afraid, to make them believe they're worthless, he let the words hang in the air. You betrayed everything that honor means. His eyes found Bradley again, held there for a fraction too long to be accidental. Bradley looked down at his hands. I want to tell you all something, Gamgee continued. Every person in this room has value. Every single one of you matters. It doesn't matter if your parents have money or if they don't. It doesn't matter if you live in a big house or a small apartment. It doesn't matter if your family looks like what you see on TV or if it looks completely different. His voice grew stronger. What matters is how you treat people. What matters is whether you stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. What matters is whether you have the courage to be kind when cruelty is easier. Mrs. Patterson's expression had shifted from concern to something that looked almost like tears. So when you think about careers, when you think about what you want to be when you grow up, don't just think about what job you'll have. Think about what kind of person you'll be. Will you be someone who walks past a person who needs help? Or will you be someone who stops? Will you be someone who makes others feel small to make yourself feel big? Or will you be someone who lifts others up? He paused, letting the question settle over the room like a benediction. A silent brotherhood isn't silent because it hides. It's silent because true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It simply shows up when needed. It stands where it's needed. It protects who needs protection. Gamgee looked directly at Roland, and his voice softened. And it never, ever abandons family. The auditorium remained silent for a long moment after he finished. Then, surprisingly, someone started clapping. It was Ms. Rodriguez. Within seconds, others joined. Parents, teachers, even some of the children, though Roland suspected they didn't fully understand why they were applauding, only that something profound had just occurred. Gamgee handed the microphone back to Mrs. Patterson and returned to his position at the back. As he passed Roland, he placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that said more than any speech could. Roland looked around the auditorium at the faces of his classmates, saw the way they were looking at him now, not with pity, not with mockery, with something closer to awe, to respect, to the recognition that he was part of something larger than himself. Bradley Chin sat very still, his father's hand on his shoulder, both of them looking like they'd been fundamentally recalibrated. And Roland realized that Gamgee hadn't just given a speech about honor and brotherhood. He'd just rewritten the entire social architecture of Roosevelt Elementary School. After the assembly, the auditorium emptied in clusters, children rushing toward recess, parents lingering to chat with teachers, the normal rhythm of a school day reasserting itself. Roland found himself surrounded by classmates who'd never spoken to him before, asking questions about his uncles, about the cars, about whether they were secret agents or movie stars or something equally exotic. Bradley Chun had disappeared the moment Mrs. Patterson dismissed them. Gamgee stood near the back exit, speaking quietly with Mrs. Patterson. Roland couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw the principal nod several times, her expression shifting from worry to something approaching relief. Whatever Gamgee was saying, it was working. Then Roland saw Marcus Chun hovering near the doorway, clearly waiting. When Gamgee finished with Mrs. Patterson, Marcus approached with the kind of careful deliberation people use when navigating minefields. "Mr. Park," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "I wonder if I might have a word." Gamgee studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Gentlemen," he addressed Taemin and Young Soo, "keep Roland company. Mr. Chun and I are going to step outside for a brief conversation." Roland watched them leave through the side door. Marcus's confident posture from earlier now replaced with something more cautious. The door closed behind them, leaving Roland with a burning curiosity about what was being said. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the empty playground. Gamgee leaned against the brick wall, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Marcus stood a careful distance away, his hands in his pockets. "Your speech was quite moving," Marcus began. "Very thoughtful. But that's not why you want to talk," Gamgee said mildly. Marcus's smile was thin. "No, I wanted to clarify some things. About my son's behavior toward Roland. Bradley can be competitive, but he's not malicious. Just young. Still learning appropriate boundaries." "Boundaries," Gamgee repeated. "Interesting word choice." He pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward Marcus. "Is this your company? Chin Investment Partners?" Marcus glanced at the screen, confusion flickering across his face. "Yes. What about it?" "My organization keeps tabs on various business activities. Import-export means we intersect with a lot of financial institutions." Gamgee's tone remained conversational. "We've become aware of some irregularities. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Client funds being moved in ways that don't quite align with SEC regulations. Some creative accounting that would be very interesting to federal investigators." The color drained from Marcus's face. "I don't know what you're—" "Marcus." Gamgee's voice cut through the denial like a blade. "I'm not here to blackmail you. I'm not interested in your business practices, unethical as they may be. What I am interested in is your son's behavior toward Roland, and more specifically, where that behavior comes from." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My son is—" "Reflection of what he's taught at home," Gamgee finished. "Children don't invent cruelty. They learn it. They absorb it from the adults around them, from the way their parents treat service workers, talk about people with less money, dismiss those they consider beneath them." He pocketed his phone. "Bradley called Roland nobody and worthless. Where do you think he learned those words?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. "Here's what's going to happen," Gamgee said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You're going to go home and have a conversation with your son about respect. Real respect, not the performative kind you show to people you think can help your career. You're going to explain to him that every person has value, regardless of their circumstances, and you're going to model that behavior going forward. And if I don't—" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then I make a phone call." Gamgee shrugged. "I have contacted the SEC. Very thorough people. They love investigating financial fraud, especially when someone hands them a detailed file." He paused. "But it won't come to that. Because you're a smart man, Marcus. Smart enough to understand that teaching your son compassion is a much better outcome than teaching him what happens when his father goes to prison." Marcus looked like he might be sick. "This is extortion." "This is parenting advice," Gamgee corrected, "from one guardian to another. The difference is Roland's family actually cares about the kind of man he becomes." He pushed off from the wall. "Your son has potential, Marcus. He's smart, confident, capable. But if you raise him to believe that wealth makes him superior, that cruelty is acceptable when directed at the right targets, you're not raising a successful man. You're raising a monster in an expensive suit." The words landed like physical blows. Marcus's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "1 week, Gamgee said. I want to hear from Roland that Bradley's behavior has changed, that he's not just avoiding Roland out of fear, but actually treating him and others with genuine respect. He started walking back toward the door, then paused. And Marcus, fix your business practices. The fact that I know about them means others will eventually figure out too. Better to clean it up now than explain it to federal prosecutors later. He disappeared back into the school, leaving Marcus Chin standing alone on the playground, the morning sun suddenly feeling much less warm. Inside, Roland looked up as Gamgee returned, questions written across his face. But Gamgee simply smiled and ruffled his hair. "Everything's handled," he said. "I think you'll find Bradley much more pleasant from now on." Roland wanted to ask how, wanted to understand what magic words could transform his tormentor overnight. But something in Gamgee's expression suggested that some questions were better left unasked. Some lessons Roland was learning were taught in silence. Miller Anderson had been drinking since noon. The Golden Lotus had called again, the third time this week, and he'd let it go to voicemail like always. They could wait. They always waited. That's what people like them did when you owed them money. They waited and they threatened, and eventually they forgot about you if you made yourself scarce enough. He'd spent the afternoon at his usual bar, letting the whiskey smooth the edges off his anxiety, complaining to anyone who'd listen about his ungrateful stepson and his nagging girlfriend. By the time he climbed into his truck, the sun was setting and his rage had that particular quality that alcohol gave it, unfocused but potent, looking for a target. The apartment would do. Sarah would do. The kid definitely would do. He took the stairs two at a time despite his unsteady gait, fumbling with his keys, already planning the lecture he'd deliver about career day, about wasting everyone's time with school nonsense, about the electricity bill that was due and the groceries that cost too much, and every other grievance that justified his anger. The door swung open. Miller stepped inside, already opened his mouth to yell. The words died in his throat. His living room was full of men, 15 of them, to be exact, all wearing dark suits, all sitting or standing in positions that seemed casual but created an inescapable net. They'd arranged themselves like they owned the space. Some on his couch, some in his chairs, one leaning against the wall near the kitchen where Sarah stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. Roland sat at the dining table, perfectly still, his eyes wide but not, Miller noticed, afraid. At the center of it all, in Miller's own recliner, his chair, the one he'd specifically told Sarah and the kid never to sit in, was a man with slick back hair and a neck tattoo just visible above his collar. Miller Anderson. Gamgee said pleasantly, "We've been waiting for you. Please, come in. Close the door. We have things to discuss." Miller's hand was still on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The alcohol that had made him brave an hour ago now made him slow, confused, vulnerable. "Who the hell?" he started, but Gamgee raised a finger, and Miller's voice simply stopped working. "Close the door," Gamgee repeated, and this time it wasn't suggestion. Miller closed the door. "Good. Now, I imagine you're confused. Let me clarify." Gamgee gestured around the room. "My name is Gamgee Park. These are my associates. We represent the Golden Lotus, to whom you owe $43,000. But that's actually not why we're here." He paused. "Well, not entirely why we're here." Miller's gaze darted to Sarah, then to Roland, trying to understand what was happening. The boy looked different somehow, straighter, calmer, like he'd grown 3 inches in the past week. "We're here," Gamgee continued, "because of that bruise." He pointed at Roland's eye, the purple now fading to yellow-green. "And the one before that, and the one before that. We're here because you've been using your hands to hurt people who can't fight back. People under your own roof. People you're supposed to protect. This is my house," Miller said, his voice coming back thin and reedy. "You can't just... Your house." Tae-min spoke up from the couch, his scarred face splitting into a cold smile. "You're 3 months behind on rent. Technically, this is your landlord house. You're just temporarily occupying it. And the furniture?" Young Soo added from his position near the window. "That couch we're sitting on? Still being paid off. 12 more months of installments you probably won't make." Miller felt the walls closing in. "What do you want?" "We want several things," Gamgee said. First, we want you to understand your situation. You owe us money you can't pay. You've been dodging our calls. Under normal circumstances, that would result in, let's call it aggressive collection practices. He smiled, and it was not kind. But you've complicated things by hurting Roland. And Roland, as it happens, is family now. Family? Miller's voice cracked. He's just some kid. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Every man straightened slightly, their casual postures shifting to something coiled and dangerous. Gamgee didn't raise his voice, but his words carried the weight of absolute authority. Finish that sentence, and what happens next won't be a conversation. Miller's mouth snapped shut. Roland came to us for help, Gamgee said. He walked into our establishment alone, terrified, desperate, and asked for a father for one day. Do you understand what that means? An 8-year-old child was so afraid, so beaten down, so convinced of his own worthlessness, that he risked everything to ask strangers for help. His voice dropped lower. That's your legacy, Miller. That's what you've built here. Sarah made a small sound, something between a sob and a gasp. Roland reached over and took her hand. Here's what's going to happen, Gamgee said, leaning forward in the recliner. You're going to sign divorce papers. Sarah's lawyer, who we're providing, will have them ready by Monday. You're going to walk away from this relationship, from this apartment, from this city. We're forgiving your debt as payment for the damage you've done to this family. You can't make me, Miller started. We can, Taemin interrupted. We absolutely can. The question is whether you walk away or whether we carry you away. Your choice. And if you ever come back, Young-soo added quietly, if you ever try to contact Sarah or Roland, if you even think about this family again, the debt comes back, plus interest, plus collection fees, plus the cost of hunting you down. He smiled. Trust me, Miller. You don't want that math. Miller looked around the room at 15 men who'd invaded his home, dismantled his life, and done it all while sitting on his furniture like they were having a book club meeting. He looked at Sarah, saw no sympathy in her eyes. Looked at Roland, saw no fear. He'd lost. Completely and utterly lost. When do I leave? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tonight, Gamgee said. Pack one bag. We'll give you a ride to a motel. You have 72 hours to get out of the city. He stood, straightening his jacket. Gentlemen, help Mr. Anderson pack. Make sure he doesn't take anything that belongs to Sarah or Roland. For men followed Miller into the bedroom. The sounds of drawers opening and closing filled the apartment. Gamgee walked over to where Sarah and Roland sat, crouching down to their level. You're safe now, he said quietly. Both of you. The apartment rent is paid for the next year. Sarah, we have a job for you at one of our legitimate businesses. Restaurant management. Good pay. Flexible hours. Roland, he looked at the boy. You call if you need anything. Anything at all. 15 minutes later, Miller was gone, escorted out by men in dark suits, carrying a single duffel bag. The apartment felt different, larger, like something oppressive had been removed, and the walls could finally breathe. Sarah wrapped her arms around Roland, tears streaming down her face. And for the first time in years, they were tears of relief. The lawyer arrived Monday morning at 9 sharp. Her name was Jennifer Kwan, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet competence that came from years of handling cases most lawyers wouldn't touch. She wore a navy suit, sensible heels, and had kind eyes that had seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything. Sarah sat at the dining table, the same table where Roland had done homework while listening to Miller's threats, where she'd eaten silent dinners with fear as a third guest, and stared at the paper spread before her. Divorce petition. Restraining order, custody documentation, though there was no custody to fight over since Miller had never legally adopted Roland. Financial separation agreement. This section here, Jennifer said, pointing to a paragraph near the bottom, establishes that you have no financial liability for any debts incurred by Mr. Anderson during your relationship. That includes the $43,000 owed to the Golden Lotus, which have been marked as satisfied and forgiven. Forgiven? Sarah repeated, the word strange in her mouth. They're just letting it go? The organization considers the matter closed, Jennifer said carefully. Mr. Anderson's debt was paid through other means. She didn't elaborate, and Sarah didn't ask. Some answers were better left unknown. And he signed these? Sarah's finger traced a signature line, Miller's scrawl looking rushed and angry even on paper. Saturday morning. I met him at a motel on the east side. He wasn't happy, but he signed everything. Jennifer's expression was neutral, but something in her tone suggested that Miller hadn't been given much choice. The restraining order is active immediately. If he comes within 500 feet of you or Roland, he'll be arrested. If he contacts you in any way, phone, email, social media, he'll be arrested. The order is good for 5 years, renewable if needed. Roland sat on the couch, pretending to read but actually listening to every word. He'd been quiet since Friday night, processing the reality that Miller was actually gone, that the apartment was actually theirs, that the fear that had been his constant companion had actually left. There's one more thing, Jennifer said, pulling a folder from her briefcase. Mr. Park asked me to give you this. Sarah opened the folder. Inside was an employment contract with Golden Palace Restaurant, one of the legitimate businesses the syndicate owned, known for its authentic Korean cuisine and impeccable service. The salary listed made her breath catch. It was nearly double what she'd been making at the grocery store, with health insurance, paid time off, and a clause about flexible scheduling for family needs. I don't understand, Sarah said quietly. Why are they doing this? Jennifer's expression softened. Because your son walked into the Golden Lotus and asked for help, and apparently that meant something to them. She paused. Mr. Park was very clear about his expectations. This isn't charity. He expects you to work hard, to be reliable, to treat the job with respect. But he also expects a job to treat you with respect. If anyone at the restaurant gives you trouble, you have his direct number. She slid a business card across the table, embossed black letters on cream cardstock, Gamgee Park, with a phone number and nothing else. He said to tell you, Jennifer continued, that Roland is family now, which means your family too, and family takes care of family. Sarah's hand trembled as she picked up the card. I don't know how to thank them. You don't have to. Just show up for work next Monday. Raise your son right, and remember that you're not alone anymore. Jennifer stood, gathering her papers. I'll file these documents today. The divorce will be finalized in 6 weeks, but the restraining order is immediate. You're safe, Sarah. Both of you. After Jennifer left, Sarah sat in the silence of the apartment, the divorce papers neatly stacked in front of her, the employment contract beside them, the business card held between her fingers like a talisman. Roland came to sit beside her. Mom! Yeah, baby? Are we really safe now? Sarah looked at her son, this brave, impossible child who'd done what she couldn't, who'd found help where she'd seen only danger, who'd saved them both by asking strangers for tender care, and had somehow made it real. Yeah, she said, pulling him close. We're really safe now. The following week passed in a blur of new routines. Sarah started at Golden Palace Restaurant on Monday, discovering that the head chef was a woman in her 50s who ran the kitchen with firm kindness and actually asked about her son's homework. The other staff were polite, professional, and notably careful not to ask questions about how she'd gotten the job. Roland returned to Roosevelt Elementary to find that the social landscape had fundamentally shifted. Bradley Chin now nodded to him in the hallways, his cruelty replaced by cautious respect. Other kids who'd ignored him before now included him in playground games. Teachers who'd overlooked him now made sure to call on him in class. On Wednesday afternoon, Tae-min showed up at the apartment with 2 men carrying furniture. Boss said your couch was terrible, he explained, directing them to remove the old one and replace it with something newer, more comfortable, actually theirs. And that table is falling apart. Here. By Thursday, the apartment looked different, felt different. The oppressive weight of Miller's presence had been replaced by something lighter, something that felt almost like hope. Friday evening, there was a knock on the door. Sarah answered to find Gamgee standing in the hallway, holding a bag of takeout from Golden Palace. I was in the neighborhood, he said, which they both knew was a lie. Thought I'd check in. Sarah invited him in, and they ate together at the new table. Her, Roland, and this impossible man who'd turned their lives around in a week. The conversation was easy, natural, touching on school and work, and carefully avoiding the deeper truths of what had been done, what had been risked, what it all meant. As Gamgee was leaving, Roland followed him to the door. "Thank you," Roland said quietly, "for everything." Gamgee crouched down, eye level with the boy. "You saved yourself, Roland. You walked through that door. You asked for help. That took more courage than anything we did." He smiled. "But you're welcome. And remember, you call if you need anything. Day or night. You're family now." "What does that mean?" Roland asked. "Being family? It means you're never alone again," Gamgee said simply. "It means when you fall, someone catches you. When you're scared, someone stands beside you. When you need help, someone answers." He stood, ruffling Roland's hair. "It means exactly what I said at career day. Brotherhood, the real kind." After he left, Sarah and Roland stood at the window, watching the black SUV pull away into the evening traffic. "Mom," Roland said. "Yeah, I think we're going to be okay." Sarah wrapped her arm around his shoulders, pulling him close. "Yeah, baby, I think we are." For the first time in either of their memories, the statement felt like truth rather than desperate hope. The debt had been paid, the danger had passed, and they were finally impossibly free.